This is the second video on using the text analysis software. And this one has to do with how do you use the software. I'm going to give you 3 examples of how to use the software in a concrete manner. And first, let me talk about the components for author attribution, and they're on the top of this page: content, context, and calculation. Each can veto the other 2. They're all important. One is not more important than the other. Certainly, calculation can lead to an investigation of a work because an author comes up high in a calculation, and then you have to go find the content and context. More often, we find an article or a work that no one knows who wrote, where the content and the context fit a certain author, and then we'll start the test. And that's what we'll see here in a minute. Content means is the philosophy, is the politics of the article fit with other works of the author on that particular subject in that particular time. The context is how the article was produced. In other words, was the author in the city in which it was printed? If not, how do you explain how it was printed in a different city or even a different country? Did the author have a relationship with the printer? Normally, writers use the same outlet over and over again because they have a working relationship with the printer. And then the calculation, which is this software. So let's take a couple of concrete examples. In the Complete Collected Works of Thomas Paine by Philip Foner from 1945, he included for the first time in the corpus of Paine's works something called a serious address to the people of Pennsylvania. The content of this fits Paine very well because it includes the same phrasing and the same sentiments that existed in other works. And the subject matter was the main focus of Paine at the time it was written, late 1778. The context, is what immediately made Foner put this into his collected works. He discovered a letter from the French ambassador Girard to someone in France named Vergennes that Paine wrote this. Girard claimed that Paine wrote this particular article, which is a good clue, so we need to test it. Also, Paine himself says in an article written in 1786, an article on the bank, that he referenced Serious Address to the People of Pennsylvania as his work. So that alone is enough to just put this in the collected works. However, we're going to use calculation to confirm. Maybe there was another writer that helped him. Maybe he claimed credit when he shouldn't have, which is unlikely, but we have to test. So this was published in the Pennsylvania Packet, something that Paine, the major newspaper that Paine worked with more than any, in December of 78 in 4 parts. This has more to do with the content, but it follows a year-long fight by the Whig Society, in which Paine was the main writer and organizer of, which was formed, the Whig Society was formed in order to counter a Tory-led attempt to overthrow the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776. This is Paine's only essay regarding defense of that. So it would make sense that he would write against the Tory sympathizers in trying to overturn the Constitution. And this was a major fight in late 1778. It disrupted all the works. This was being done right in the middle of the Revolutionary War. It was led by people of influence like John Dickinson and Benjamin Rush. They were trying to overthrow the Pennsylvania Constitution, claiming it was too democratic. So Paine, this is the only essay where he took up the question. So it's worth testing just to confirm that all the pieces fit. So when you test this, here are some samples. Every possible American author writing at the time was tested against Paine, and you can see visually the obvious outcome. In fact, Pain never gets below, I thought I summed this up, pain never gets below 70%, I don't think. A lot of 80% against every author. And there is no other author who gets more than 20%, which is very significant. There's no possibility of collaborative writing here. There's no other author that has a dent on the calculation of this, on testing. So this confirms Foner's putting this into the collected works. Foner made a lot of mistakes, but this wasn't one of them. This is pretty solid. Next one. This is another work from Philip Foner's complete collected works at Holmes Payne. The Dream Interpreted. It was in the Pennsylvania Magazine, which was Payne was editor of at this time in May of 1775. It was probably written before they got word of the Concord-Lexington battle. It was in support of American sovereignty, basically the beauty of America and how it would be wonderful if no one was oppressing them, type of very poetic device. However, the content of using dream imagery is not common to Payne at all. However, the politics do fit Payne, so it's worth investigating as Payne's. It was printed in Payne's journal, so it may be his. But a specific mention in it, in the context of this, in the essay, the writer makes a point of returning from Virginia, which is far south of Philadelphia, where Payne lived, and going and resting on the way in Bucks County before he got home, which is north of Philadelphia. In fact, Payne didn't make any connection to that area until years later. This is 1775. So this creates some question about the authorship. This doesn't fit. So we tested it. Tested it many, many times. And here's two representative graphs. You can see Payne has next to nothing here. He doesn't even reach 10% on these two. And in no other test of the 20 or so tests that we did with all the possible authors in 1775, Payne never reaches 20%. This means the calculation is saying this is not Payne's writing. Hopkinson, however, consistently wins. Every test that Hopkinson is in, he wins, like on these two. Hopkinson lived across the river next to Bucks County, and if you're traveling from the south going north to Bordentown, you would have to go through the heart of Bucks County. He also used dream imagery several times in his works. It was a common go-to for Hopkinson. And Hopkinson contributed on a regular basis to the Pennsylvania Magazine, and it's probably how he met Payne. Payne wound up moving to Bordentown eventually and being friends with Hopkinson. So Hopkinson is much more likely to be the author than Payne. And if it wasn't for the calculation, we wouldn't consider it. We regard the fact that it was Payne's magazine, the politics were sort of right. It wasn't necessarily the way Payne normally does things, but Payne was poetic and he might have written this. But the calculation is vetoing this. There's no style representation of Payne in this essay whatsoever. Another example. Major question comes up in author attribution all the time. And the question is, how do we know if we have the author present in the testing? If the author is not present, how do we know the guy who wins, the guy who has the highest amount, is really the author? Well, the content and context should help with that. However, the calculation itself can show if the author is not present. African slavery in America is a prime example of this. It's an example of one of the two ways that you can detect that the author is not present. And I'll show you what both are as we go through this. The first test I made of African slavery in America shows someone named Cassandra, who was the pen name, who was actually James Cannon, a mathematics professor at the University of Pennsylvania, who would soon become part of the Whig Society with Payne, close cohort of Payne's. He gets well over 40%, and he might be the author. However, that doesn't necessarily fit. James Cannon seemed to have the same deist outlook as Paine, and the basis for African slavery in America was an argument against slavery based on a Christian argument. Doesn't sound like Cassandra either, but he comes up strong, so we're going to have to deal with that. Let's do another test. Whoops, John Adams shows up, 70%. He could be the author. Now what do we do? Maybe Cassandra and Adams wrote this together, which is highly improbable. Cassandra actually wasn't even that active in 1775 yet. He was just getting his feet wet in politics, and to be in a position to co-write something with Adams is a stretch. But we have to take this seriously. We've got Cassandra and Adams showing strong stylistic features. Another test. Benezet. Benezet was the main abolitionist writer in the Americas in the 1770s. He led the abolitionist movement at the time. He was a Quaker, and he just received over 60%. You will notice in all of these tests, which I failed to mention, that Paine is negligible in all these. Paine is not showing much of any stylistic features. Paine is credited with having written African Slavery in America by Conway in 1894, when Conway printed a collected works of Paine, greatly expanded from other previous collected works. However, he threw in a couple of things like this one, which have really no basis to put in. And we're finding that out now. This was African slavery in America for several decades has raised doubts about whether it was Paine's based on the religious argument in it, Christian religious argument in it. Let's test again. Well, now Paine shows up all of a sudden with Witherspoon. So we have 5 people already: Hopkinson, Adams, Benezet, Paine, Witherspoon. My goodness. Oh, here's another test. Franklin now is in the game. Notice how Cassandra is dwarfed. Paine is dwarfed by Franklin. Benezet dwarfs Cassandra, where Cassandra won at one time. So we have a feature here that shows up when the author is not present. And it's simply this. Getting different authors with well over 40% is an indicator of an absent real author. And this is supported by the fact that they cancel each other out, like Franklin cancels out Paine here, Cassandra here, etc. So person who first showed a lot of strength, when another person shows a lot of strength and that other first person is dwarfed, that is a feature that we're still looking for the real author. If the real author is not present, all his stylistic features get chewed up by other people present. So, how do we determine who wrote African Slavery in America? Well, we have to keep looking. There is a second indicator, which doesn't appear in African Slavery in America. It appeared in one test, and I'll show you what it looks like. If you have an array of authors where no one gets 40% repeatedly, like if you do 10, 20 tests, and all your authors, no one shows 40%, you're probably dealing with one of two things. If 2 people keep coming up 1 or 2, 1 and 2, then you're dealing with collaboration. If no one shows up more than 40% and there's no constant 1 and 2 of the same 2 people, you probably don't have the author. In our case with African slavery, we're dealing with the first indicator. Many people getting high results. So what do? We keep looking. So I had to go out and find new people. I started studying early abolitionist writing in America, and I came up with a couple of names, and here is one of them. A man named Hopkins, Samuel Hopkins. He's from Rhode Island. And next to Benezet, he was a leading abolitionist writer at the time. He was writing from a different church. I believe it was Presbyterian. I might have that wrong. Benezet was a Quaker, but they were allied in this writing. They had a campaign to abolish slavery in America, and he was a major writer. In fact, the the content of the author files that I used to create Hopkinson's author file led me to believe that this is our author, because the content of this, the content of his author files sounded very much like African slavery in America. It was the same Christian religious argument against slavery, in the same phrases, the same approach. Hopkins fits in perfectly in terms of content. There's an issue with context, since he's from Rhode Island, and this was printed in the Pennsylvania Journal in March of 1775, and we have to account for that, which we will in a minute. But here's another test with Hopkins. He's receiving almost 80%. Here's Benezet, who once won it. Here's Cassandra, who once won a test. Here's Franklin. Here's Payne. Here's Witherspoon. Everybody but Adams is dwarfed by Hopkins. If we test again, Benezet, Franklin, same, very high, 80% against everybody else except Adams. So let's test Adams. And we tested Adams not only by himself, but with, here's all five, all six, Benezet, Adams, Cassandra, Franklin, Payne, Witherspoon, they're all here. And Hopkins still gets over 60%. So based on the testing, Hopkins is our leading candidate. Let's test content. And like I said, the content of Hopkins' other writings match African slavery in America very closely, extremely closely. Now, as far as the content goes, Hopkins was in Rhode Island. The essay was sent with a note signed A.B. to print this article, please. It was a note to the printer. Hopkins and Benezet were close allies in the abolitionist movement. Hopkins sent this to Philadelphia to be printed to Benezet, and Benezet forwarded the article to the printer with the note and signed it A.B. for Anthony. I think it's Anthony Benezet. My next video will be extending this into the area of collaboration, which might be more than one video. It's very important because collaboration seems to be one of the major vehicles for producing articles in the 18th century, especially politically based articles. And we'll get into that in the next video.